Hello everyone and welcome back to another album review. In this video I'm going to review AVANT Stupid by Evil Moisture and Expose Your Eyes. This is a brand new collaborative album from Evil Moisture which I've only knew before due to a collaboration many years ago with Hannah Taras, which when you have the Hannah Taras name attached to an album, you know that it's gonna be a crazy experience, and this was no exception. Expose Your Eyes, on the other hand, was a name that I had no idea before. Now this is a cassette tape released by the UK label Step Gloss, which it seems that it's a label that just publishes collaborations. It doesn't accept solo submissions, which is something that I haven't seen a label do before. So I think that this is kinda interesting. I like this sort of consistency with this label, and this is the first release I listened from this label. I'm not really sure how I ended up stumbling upon this thing, but just looking at this album cover, I'm always a sucker when it comes to these types of album covers, which are these bizarre collages, and it gave me the impression that the music might also be sort of the same thing, an avant-garde sound collage release. This is not entirely the case, but what I got with this album is something that I sort of expected. It is a quite experimental album that goes much more into the very noisy side of things. And in my opinion, I would just say right off the bat that this is an absolute recommendation of a release from me. This is one of those more underground hidden gems that you don't easily find and not many people mention. Hell, I don't really know if there's anyone else who's going to mention this album and review it on YouTube. And one of the main purposes of this channel, at points at least, is just stumbling into those underground releases, and if I find something that really grabs my attention, to share with you. And I feel that this is one of the greatest releases you can find from this year. If you are into some really experimental and avant-garde material, you definitely need to check this album out, because I feel that in what it does, this is definitely one of the most compelling albums I've heard in a very long time. It is a kinda lengthy release that goes for almost an hour of material and only separated in 7 tracks. And this album manages to be constantly engaging. There are a lot going on with many of the tracks, there is a lot of variation, there are many unpredictable elements to it. It constantly manages to grab your attention and just constantly bring new, innovative and intriguing elements to the mix. And I like that it actually goes into multiple different directions of harsh noise music. It makes the whole thing sound refreshing from start to finish, and apart from that, I don't really want to say that much about this particular release, because this is more of an album that you have to experience for yourselves, but I'm still gonna go through the track listing and give my thoughts in each individual track, because I like that, like I said, this album goes into multiple stylistic directions. The album starts with a 7-minute track, NEURON Chop, which already starts like really powerful with those heavy noise sections that are really glitchy, and the sound of this project is also really good. Everything just sounds so detailed and well put together. It doesn't take that much long for this track to tone it down though. Just from the second minute, the track already has become much more chill. It doesn't have those insane free improvised noise sections. It only goes into very few occasions, and it's just being carried by this ominous sound that constantly progresses throughout the rest of the song. And for me, this is definitely a pretty good and interesting track that manages to be really engaging from start to finish. Even when it goes to the slower side of things, I actually like this part even more because it gives the song more of a depth and character, making it to stand out. The track Pedal to the Metal is the most sort of accessible moment this album offers, because this is definitely the most straightforward moment in this album, and it's the easiest to get through because it's just this loop that constantly goes for 5 minutes. It is a really intriguing and really well put together and done loop that sounds awesome. The whole sound and the progression is superb, and I like that at times it has this sort of unpredictable moments where it can become a bit more glitchy and just feel like it skips, which is enough to grasp you and make you feel hooked with this entire song, even if it is the most repetitive moment. The track Anti-Intestinal Gumbags is a really short one that goes for only 2 minutes, but in just those 2 minutes there are just so much going on to it because it is a batshit insane song. It is definitely the harshest and the most chaotic moment in this album, especially at the beginning. There is this really messy panning where you have sounds that you just hear from the left and others from the right, and it makes for a mess that is just really well put together still. It is a track that sounds amazing, the textures, the glitch, the noise portions being put together, it makes for a really gratifying experience. For me, the 10-minute track Artist Cheese was possibly my most underwhelming moment in this entire project. I still feel that it has some really nice and intriguing moments to it. This one does not have the intensity of the previous tracks, and it doesn't really need to. It goes into a much more unsettling direction, filled with many different samples like spoken word and field recordings that just add to the experience. And apart from that, it's mainly having a sort of simple high frequency glitch portion that goes on, and it is free improvised, it goes in many different directions. The issue comes with the samples because all of them end up having almost the same use of effects. It just has the same usage of delay and stretch, and so it makes all of the samples just sound sort of the same and not really making the experience feel like it constantly develops, even if it becomes somewhat more intense when it comes to its final minutes. Due to this lack of innovation when it comes to the sample manipulations, I feel that this track had the potential to be much more varied, but at what it stands for, it is a bit one-dimensional. One thing I also have to say about this track is that it feels much better listening to it on headphones or with speakers that manage to grab very low frequencies. And that's because there are portions in this track with very low frequencies, and it's better if you have a good sound system in order to just fill some gaps, because if you don't catch those very low frequencies, the experience would feel much more empty and like something is missing. With that being said though, it's still a moment that in my opinion feels somewhat one-dimensional, and I would prefer it if it was done in a different way in some occasions. The fifth track is another short moment, and this one is kinda interesting because it is really different in terms of its sound compared to other tracks. This one is possibly the loudest and the harshest noise track out of this whole project. However, the way it is mixed, it feels like a much more lo-fi approach, or just being so overcompressed and overblown that it doesn't sound that much detail. And I feel that this track has some incredible ideas to it, and I think that I would sort of prefer it if it would just stick with the production of the previous songs and having much more detailed material to it. But apart from that, I like that this track has something unique to it in terms of its sound. The sixth track features sounds that we're already sort of familiar with. It mainly contains glitchy noise portions, some of them being of very high frequencies, others on low frequencies, and it does sound like a good track, but it's certainly not one of the most intriguing or unpredictable moments in the album. And then we have the final massive track, which is a huge mess. Now, what I like about this track is that compared to almost anything else in the album, there is not a moment of harsh noise or intensity to it, and I like that it goes into a bit of a different, much more dark direction, because this track is unsettling. Just from the first minute, it has this sound that sort of feels like a distorted ringtone or a child's toy. It is somewhat horrifying to listen to, but it doesn't last long. And then you realize that as the track goes on, it's constantly progressing, always introducing new sounds, always going into something different. This one goes far more into a sound collage direction and elements of music concrete, which is something that kinda reminds me of what Nurse with Wound would do in some of his 80s works, which is a huge compliment for me. This is a track that manages to be quite engaging and captivating from start to finish, and I like how it features so many different approaches and sounds. From what it feels like sounds of everyday activities, to spoken word, to field recordings, to weirdly manipulated catchy songs, it is all over the place, and I like that it's just loops that go for less than a minute and then it just introduces another loop. You still have a few noisy and glitchy portions, and I also like that you have some glitchy static noise portions that you feel that would be randomized but are also looped, and all of them just never get intense. They are in a balanced volume position, And the one thing that also stands out with this song is this one particular sound that goes on for almost the entirety of the song and carries throughout the track, and it's a sound that is also constantly altered and manipulated. And what's really interesting about this is that I didn't catch this at first, I got this at my second listen, is that this sound that is present for almost the entirety of the song is the same with a signature sound that was contained in the very first song. So I really like this touch, and I like how this whole thing just plays out conceptually. So with that being said, I could just say a lot more about this album, but I feel that I've already said what needed to be said. This album is an essential, especially if you are into underground stuff, especially if you like really experimental, bizarre approaches. This album is incredibly produced, it is unpredictable and constantly engaging. I'm gonna give AVANT Stupid an 8 out of 10. What's your opinion on this album? Like it, dislike it, why, and what do you want me to review next time? Let me know down in the comments. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe for more content like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye.